Well, hey, everybody, welcome to North Shore. It is good to see you. I am so glad that you're with us this weekend here in this room. And for those of you who are joining us online, we're glad that you're here as well. And I just want to say happy Father's Day to all the dads in the room. And happy Father's Day to my dad, who's actually here with us this weekend. So it's super exciting that you're here, Dad. As I say often, without me, this would be just another day. So you're welcome for that. I'm just kidding. I love my dad, and I'm so glad that he's here, and I'm so glad that I have the chance to be a dad. For there's seasons in my life where I didn't know if that would be the case, and now I get to raise these two just incredible kids that I just love so much. In fact, this week, Nina was talking with Nora, and they decided to do a little game. She asked Nora to guess my age for Father's Day. And so Nora started kind of guessing. I think her first guess was 13, which I appreciate. And she went on, and Nina realized something kind of special was happening, so she took out her phone and she started to film. So take a look at this.
2.
No, he's more than 2.
1 and 0.
1 and 0 is 10. He's older than 11. 10. He's older than 11. He's older than 13. He's more than that.
8.
He's more than 8.
What is?
Do you want me to tell you?
8 and 9.
Daddy is 45.
What? He is 45? Oh, sorry.
Well, Nora, I'm sorry I'm 45 too, so I guess we both have to live with that. But I think I was thinking this week about the hardest thing about being a dad, and it's not the long hours or navigating the temper tantrums. It's all the times that I have to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for losing my patience. I'm sorry for raising my voice. I'm sorry that I disappointed you. In fact, the reality is, and you know this, there's no such thing as a perfect father. Maybe you grew up with a dad who was harsh or kind of demanding. Maybe you grew up with a dad that was a bit distant or maybe uninvolved. Maybe you grew up without a dad. And these experiences, regardless of what your experience was, these experiences can have such a great impact on our sense of worth, our identity, our sense of who we are, if we matter. And I'm not saying that the role of a father is any more significant or more important than the role of a mother, but the reality is fathers have a unique impact on us, don't they? And one of the most significant questions that comes out of a child's relationship with his or her father is the question, am I good enough? Do I have what it takes? Will I be loved? So if you've ever wrestled with a question like that, I am so glad that you're here this weekend, because today we're going to be looking at a different kind of father. A father that Jesus knew, and he invites us to know that father as well. Now, as you know, we've been in this series. It's our second week in the series called Stuff Jesus Never Said, because in our day, there's a lot of misconceptions about what he said and what he didn't say. And last week, we discovered that Jesus never said, sorry, you've gone too far, or you've sinned too much, or you've crossed that line that you can't cross, so I simply can't forgive you. Instead, Jesus told that well-known story, the story of the prodigal son. A prodigal son who demanded his inheritance, insulted his father, left his home, wasted his money, and then hit rock bottom. But when he returned, instead of finding punishment, his father threw him a party. His father welcomed him home and said, let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and he is alive again. But if you remember last week, if you were with us last week, or you know the story, not everyone was so excited about this behavior. In fact, some people thought this kind of welcoming, this kind of receiving, this kind of grace was actually quite offensive. In fact, the gospel writer Luke described the scene that caused that story to be told this way. You remember these words? He said, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And the verbs kind of tell the story, don't they? Jesus was welcoming, which is why the sinners were gathering, which is why the Pharisees were muttering. And they were saying things like, this man has no standards. He's compromising our faith. He's watering down the whole system. He thinks he can just bypass the temple system, which we've been using for 2,000 years as a way to make sure people are holy and right and acceptable before God. But notice the Pharisees, they weren't just raising a question or humbly trying to start a conversation. They were muttering. They were grumbling. They were complaining. By the way, have you ever met someone in church who went to church all the time? Maybe they worked really hard to follow the rules, but then they kind of had a bad attitude. They were complaining a lot, or maybe they're just kind of a jerk. Don't look at them. You just raise your hand if you know somebody like that, okay, right? Some of you know someone like that. Some of you may have been a person like that. And I know people who won't darken the door of a church because they've had such a bad experience or bad encounter with a person like that. You see, the muttering, the grumbling of those Pharisees reminds us that you can try really hard to do all the right things and still become the wrong kind of person. You can aim for holiness and yet end up with bitterness. But here's the good news. Jesus never said, you just need to try really hard and then I'll accept you, then you'll be holy, then you'll be worthy. What did he actually say? Well, the answer to that question is found in part 2 of the story we started last week. You see, the story of the prodigal son, the younger son, was just the prelude. It was just the preamble to the story of the second son, the older son, the son who never ran away from home, but ended up deeply, deeply lost. So if you have a Bible or a Bible app with you, you can open that up right now to the gospel according to Luke chapter 15, or you can follow along with me right here on the screen. And we're going to be picking up right where we left off last week in verse 25. So Jesus continues the story, kind of part 2 of the story this way. He says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. Meanwhile means this story, this scene is going to take place at the same time that the younger son returns. So while the father was running and the village was watching and the party was starting, the older son was working. He was out in the field. He was taking care of the family business. He was being dutiful. He was being responsible. He was being the good son, which, by the way, I can relate to. I mean, I grew up in my life kind of trying to be the good son. I wanted to please my parents and impress my teachers and outwork my friends. I tried really hard to do the right things and hang out with the right people and date the right girls. Not that I actually went out on any actual dates, but had I gone out on dates, I would have hopefully tried to date the right girls. But I never consciously rejected God or ran away from him. I mean, there were times that I sort of fantasized about what all those younger sons and daughters were doing out there in the distant country, but I stayed home. And in a way, over time, that made me feel almost spiritually or morally superior to all the other kids who were wild or reckless or promiscuous, because I thought I was following the rules, and God, I thought, was up there keeping score. And that's the older brother. That's the older son, the good son who thinks his goodness is something that you earn or achieve by not running away or not messing up. So you can only imagine what was going through his mind when he's walking home from that long day of hard labor, only to find this situation. When he came near the house, he heard, get this, music and dancing. For all you Baptists, dancing is happening in the Bible, okay? It's right there for your reference, right? Music and dancing. But he's not excited, he's suspicious. He gets out his phone. I don't know of any things happening on the calendar. I didn't see parties on the schedule. What's going on here? So he called one of the servants and asked him, what's going on? You could see the suspicion in his voice. And then, next slide. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. To which the older brother replied, amen, it's a miracle. I've been praying for this moment. I've been waiting for this moment. Father must be so happy. I hope they left some food and wine for me to celebrate, right? Or maybe not so much. Some of you know this old story about a Sunday school teacher who was telling this parable to her class of students. And she said, there was one for whom the return of the prodigal brought no rejoicing, no laughter, only bitterness and resentment. And one of the kids raised her hand and said, the fattened calf? I didn't think it was that funny either, but you can't go through Father's Day without a good dad joke, okay? So that was that one, all right? Well, there was one person who wasn't happy about that. Jesus said, and look at this, the older brother who's outside watching the music and the dancing became angry. He gets mad. I mean, he's furious about this. He becomes angry and he refuses to go in. Now, this is the first mark of what we might call older brother spirituality or older brotherism, if you will. Anger, resentment, kind of chronic bitterness. And in this case, the older brother is angry. Why? Because instead of being punished, the younger son, his little brother, got a party that in his mind should have been for him, right? He's the one that stayed home. He's the one that had behaved well. He's the one that followed the rules. He's the one that did all the right things. He's the one that's taking care of the family business. He's the one that's making up for the losses that son caused. If anybody deserves a celebration, especially when the younger son comes back, it has to be the older brother. He's the good son, the model son, the one you want to be more like. You see, when holiness becomes something that you can earn or achieve, the grace of God, the grace of Jesus is always going to seem unfair. Because I can think of very few scenes in the Bible that were as unfair as this one. The younger son should have been the very last in line to receive the fattened calf, but now he's first. He's the guest of honor. Kind of a goofy illustration of this, there's a freeway exit not far from where we live that has two lanes. The right lane exits to the east onto another highway, and the left lane exits over the freeway to the west. And during rush hour, that right lane gets really, really slow, backs up like hundreds of cars, almost to a crawl pace. But thankfully, the left lane, which we normally use, almost never has any traffic. But then here's what happens. Some of those cars stuck way back in that right lane will sneak out into the left lane, drive all the way to the front, and then merge their way back in, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? You've seen this before? Some of you do this. I can feel the guilt in the room right now, like you know it's you, right? And I get so mad, I start honking and I'm yelling at those drivers like they can hear what I'm saying. I'm yelling at them because why should they get to skip to the front? What did they do to deserve to go all the way to the front of the line? And to get this last week, like a week ago, I was in the right lane. It was way backed up. I was late for an important meeting. So you know what I did? I got out of that right lane. I drove all the way to the front and I merged back in. And guess what? Right when I did, somebody starts honking at me and they're yelling at me. And I think, how dare you honk at me? Don't you know I'm a pastor? I mean, I'm trying to help people become more loving and more patient. If anyone deserves to be at the front of the line, it's me, okay? I said I was a pastor, not a good pastor. So that's just that. That's why the older brother is so angry. I mean, his sinful little brother, that disgrace of a brother, just skipped to the front of the line. He didn't have to pay back his debt. He didn't have to prove week over week or month over month that he was the good son again or he had learned his lesson. He just showed up, confessed, and dad threw him a party. But that's not the only reason he refused to go in. See, in that culture, when a banquet is given, it's the job of the older son to serve as the head waiter in the family, which means the older son must now serve who? His shameful little brother. It's his job to embrace him as an honored guest. It's his job to pay him compliments throughout the evening. It's his job to serve him throughout the night. And the older brother's like, there is no way I'm waiting on that guy. There's no way I'm serving that guy. Not after what he did to me and to our family. Maybe after he stays home a while. Maybe after he pays off his debt. Maybe after he proves he's a different kind of person. Then I'll stoop to serve him. But certainly not now, and certainly not this way. But here's the thing, and it's a real important moment, a dynamic that we can miss with our kind of 21st century eyes by refusing to go in the house, by staying outside and refusing to play that role of the head waiter in that house. Even if he thinks he's justified, the older son is now insulting his father. He's insulting his father. He's dishonoring his father. Last week, I mentioned a scholar by the name of Dr. Kenneth Bailey, whose work has been super influential for me around the parables of Jesus. And he spent years living in the Middle East telling these stories to thousands of people. And he notes that in a Middle Eastern context, the older son's refusal to go in the house is just as offensive as the younger son asking for his share of the family wealth before his father dies. Because the older son's dishonoring act is done in public. I mean, at least the younger son went to his father in private, but now the older son dishonors his father in front of all the village to see. And everyone listening to the story would know that now the only way the father can save face is to wait for that older son to finally come in the house and then publicly rebuke and punish him. That's what they're waiting for. That's what they're expecting. Rebuke and punishment for dishonoring his father. And so once again, the entire village, everyone at the party is thinking, what will this father do now that he's been insulted again? Are you ready? Check this out. So his father went out and pleaded with him. His father went out of the house and pleaded with him. You see, in the first part of the story, we learn that the father loves the younger son enough to come out of his house and take on his shame, suffer the shame of his son's disgrace. And in the second part of the story, we see this again. The father is once again willing to come out of the house and suffer the shame of this older son as well. And notice, he doesn't rebuke or correct him. He pleads with him. And that word pleads is a very precise Greek word. It means to come alongside, to entreat, to appeal to try to make peace with. Friends, this is not the voice of an angry, threatening father saying, get in that house or I'll cut you out of the family. It's the voice of a tender, loving father's son. Please, come inside. Come inside. Come see your brother. Come inside. Please, son, come inside. But as much as the father stoops so low to love his son, the older son simply will not have it. He's worked too hard for too long. And so instead of listening to his father, he further insults his father. Jesus says this, but he answered his father, look. Now, why is that important? Well, in the first century Middle East, it was just unthinkable for a person to address a superior of any kind without some kind of title, which is why if you read through the Gospels, the disciples, they're always addressing Jesus as sir or teacher or rabbi or Lord. I mean, think about it. Even the younger son who wanted his father dead at least started his shameful request with the word father as a sign of respect. But this older son just says, look, you, which is terribly insulting, but he's not done yet. Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. In other words, I've worked hard. I've played by your rules. I've done the right things. I've read the right books. I've prayed the right prayers. I followed the right instructions, and I didn't even get a goat for it. Do you hear the resentment in that? Do you hear the entitlement in that? It's the words of a person who's been living more like a hired servant than a beloved son. But the older son is not done yet. He continues. He says, but when this son of yours, not this brother of mine, you see, he's disowned his brother a long time ago. He no longer sees him as a brother. This son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home. You kill the fattened calf for him. In other words, Dad, you are just as bad as he is. And he may have squandered his wealth with prostitutes. He may have wasted his wealth with prostitutes. But you, Dad, you wasted your wealth on him. And by the way, if you know the first part of the story from last week, Jesus never said anything about the younger son squandering his wealth with prostitutes. The older brother just made out that little detail and threw it on into the story. which, by the way, is another sign of older brotherism. We start to assume the worst about people. We start to presume details about their lives, their attitudes, their behaviors that we don't even know. We just assume that's what they're doing. We assume that's what they're thinking. We let our imaginations run wild, don't we? We fall into patterns of gossip and hearsay. By the way, anyone else ever hear of gossip happening in a church? I mean, surely not this one, right? But right, at churches, right? You see, while the younger son has sinned openly, the older son has been sinning all along, deep in his heart. Everybody knew about the moral failures of the younger son, but here's the thing. Nobody could see the failures of the older son, including himself. He can't see his pride. He can't see his arrogance. He can't even see his lack of love. They don't even strike him as a problem. But the truth is, he's got a huge problem. And it's not just that he's a sinner. We're all sinners. It's that he doesn't know it. He has no idea. He has no idea what's happened to his heart. And he's not just blind to his own sin. Get this, even worse, even more tragically, he's become blind to the Father's goodness as well. I mean, the younger son squandered everything in the far country, lost everything, ruined everything, disgraced his father, yet he could remember the goodness, the generosity of his father. It's why he goes home. The older son never left home, and yet all he could see in his father is a stingy old man. And friends, here's the thing. He didn't get there by drinking or gambling or swearing or lusting. He got there because he was living like a hired servant instead of a beloved son. He never left home, but he was 1,000,000 miles from his father. 1,000,000 miles away. And I know you know this, but this happens in our day too, doesn't it? All the time. All the time. People who commit their life to God, who sincerely seek to follow him, want to please him, want to obey him, but along the way become cold or callous or smug or self-righteous because they think God wants hired servants instead of sons. A good friend of mine once put it this way. He said, when you make a decision to put your faith in God, when you decide to take obedience seriously in your life, one of two things is going to happen to you. Either you're going to become more like the Father, humble, compassionate, self-giving, or you're going to become more like the older brother, hardened, calloused, self-serving. And maybe that's what's been happening to you. Maybe that's what's been happening in your heart. Maybe that's why, part of why you feel bitter or burned out with the whole thing. And by the way, this is why so many younger sons and daughters out there want nothing to do with Christianity. They think churches are filled with older brothers. You know why? Because so many of them actually are. The truth is, and I'm not pointing the finger at anyone here. I'm part of this too. And the reality is we need the grace of Jesus, not just when we return home like that younger son, not just when we come to faith and realize that we're loved, but every single day. We need to remember that holiness is not something that you go out and achieve. It's something you receive from the one person who's holy every single day. That never changes. Never changes. Otherwise, and this happens, and some of you know this place so well. Otherwise, all those acts of devotion and dedication, all those moments of piety and perseverance will tempt you to believe that you've earned your seat at the table and that God somehow owes you something. And friends, that place, at least according to Jesus and the picture he paints in the story, that place is more spiritually dangerous than anything that happens out in the distant country. But there's good news here, really good news in this story. And the good news is Jesus doesn't want that to happen to you or to me. He loves you too much to let that happen to you or to me. And I know this is true because of what the Father does next in the story. After being insulted and dishonored again, the father looks into the eyes of that angry, bitter son and says this. Take a look at this. He says, my son, my son. And by the way, this word for son, you don't see this in the English. This word for son in the Greek is a different word for son than any other form of the word son in the story. And it's a more tender word, a more compassionate word. It means my boy, my best boy. And by the way, we older sons and daughters need that kind of extra tenderness, don't we, to soften our hardened hearts. The father says, my child, my best child. And he says, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. You see, you were never meant to be a hired servant. You've always been a son, and whatever is God's, it belongs to you already. And we older sons and daughters need to be reminded that we're not in the family of God. We don't have to earn our way there. It's a gift. Everything he has, God's saying, everything I have, it's already yours. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to achieve it. You don't work for it. You receive it. And then the father continues, he's not done yet. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And I love this phrase, brother of yours, because you see, the older brother had long since disowned his brother. That son of yours, he said, but now the father tries to restore the relationship. You see that? Oh no, this brother of yours was dead and he's alive. Because here's the thing, the father loves both sons, both the rebel and the rule keeper. And as for wasting his love, I think he was looking into the son's eyes, and I think he would say, you're right, older son. You're absolutely right. I wasted my love on that sinner like your younger brother. Now, please let me waste it on you. Let me waste it on you. Some of you have been trying really, really hard to have that perfect marriage, or to raise those perfect kids, or to make those perfect grades. You've been trying really hard to beat that addiction, or break that habit, or maintain that reputation. Maybe you've been feeling bitter or burned out because you've been living as if God's love is something that's based on how well you follow the rules. But Jesus never said, I'll love you more if you just get everything right. He said, you have a Father in heaven who's come out of his house in the person of Jesus, not just to save those who are lost in the far country, but to save those who never left home. Because here's the thing. He would want to say to you now, my child, my best child, thank you for longing to be holy. Thank you for all of your effort to be faithful, but that's not why you're my child. You are my child because I love you. Did you know that? Friends, do you know this? Like deep, deep in your heart, do you know this? Do you know that God's love isn't based on what you do? It isn't based on what you can achieve. It isn't based on how well you behave. His love is based on who he is. Which means there's nothing you can do to make him love you anymore. And get this, there's nothing you can do to make him love you any less. The question is, can you receive this? Are you willing? Because so often we want to push this away. We want to earn it. We want to achieve it. We want to be worth it. Can you humble your heart enough to receive this? Because here's the thing. The younger son, he did. He came home broken, a mess, humiliated, but willing to receive the father's love, and he was welcomed back home. So what did the older son do? Anybody know? It's interesting. Jesus doesn't say. He just ends the story almost without an ending, leaving the audience guessing. Although in that culture, in that context, it would be pretty clear what would need to happen next. Because the father had so shamefully embarrassed his family, shamefully embarrassed the name and honor of his family, the older son, to save face and protect his honor, must now do to the father what the father should have done to the younger son. Anyone remember what the ceremony was called? We talked about it last week. Kezazah, cutting off, which means right there with the crowd watching, he would mock his father, he would scorn his father, and then he would pick up his staff and he would beat his father. And by the way, isn't it interesting? Isn't that exactly what the Pharisees and the teachers of the law did to Jesus? You see, they could not accept the way he was welcoming sinners, last to first. Come to my table, you're welcomed home. They could not accept it. And in the name of holiness, in the name of righteousness, in the name of purity, they turned him over to the Romans, had him executed on a cross. And yet, get this, even on that cross, as all the older sons and daughters scoffed and scorned, Jesus didn't say, well, finally, I'm done with you. You know what he said? Father. Because he knows what kind of father the Father is. Father, what? Forgive them. Friends, this is no ordinary Father. This is your heavenly Father. And he didn't just come into this world in the person of Jesus to die for rule-breaking sinners. He came into the world to die for rule-keeping sinners as well. Hoping, praying, longing, waiting, wanting you to come home and come in and receive your Father's love. Which means there's another possible ending to the story, isn't there? Perhaps, just perhaps, the older son, like his younger brother, humbled himself and let his father love him. Perhaps he finally realized that holiness isn't something you achieve, it's something you receive from the one person who actually is holy. Perhaps the story ended with another miraculous, amazing, scandalous, loving embrace. This older son of mine was dead, but now he too is alive again. But for that to happen, the older son must do something that older sons and daughters struggle so deeply to do. It's real simple. He's got to do this. Because see, down here, it's not about me. It's not about what I can do. It's not about my reputation or my resume. Down here, it's all about grace. Down here, it's all about what God has done for me. Down here, it's not about how holy I am. It's about how loving the Father is. And the only way to receive the love of this kind of Father isn't to prove yourself or promise anything. It's to confess and be on your knees and realize it's only because of his love that I get to be welcome home. And some of you need this moment right now so desperately. And so whether you're in this room or watching online, I want to invite you to do something right now a little different. If you close your eyes for just a moment. So everybody close your eyes. And nobody's watching, so this is just between you and God. And I want to invite you, if you need this, if you've been bitter or burned out or just trying, only to feel like your heart's getting colder and colder, I want to invite you to get on your knees right now in this room or wherever you're watching from, just out of your chair, on your knees. It's important to physically be in a posture where you can experience how God's love works in your life. And so I want to invite you right now to be on your knees like the younger son was when he came home, like the older son may have been, and hear the words of the Father for you right now. My child, my best child, I am so grateful for your longing to be holy, for trying so hard, for your desire to be faithful, but that's not why you're my child. You are mine because I love you, and if you'll only receive that now. And so, Jesus, we want to receive that love that you paid for on the cross. You've done all the work. We just have to humbly surrender before you and let you love us. So God, do that. Love us right now. Let us hear your voice and see your heart. Father, thank you for your love. Thank you for receiving me home again. And everybody who prayed that prayer said, amen.